Hello everybody, Nick here, back again with another video. What's today's video? I'm going to be telling you about how I accidentally nuked my MacBook's hard drive by total accident, and quite honestly, it's kind of funny and it's also really sad at the same time. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show, because this is going to be one heck of a story to tell. And also, it might be a little bit of a learning lesson for all of you watching, as to not do what I did. So without further ado, let's get started. So just to give you a little bit of a backstory as to what exactly I was doing when this happened, I was trying to install Ubuntu Linux onto my MacBook Pro because, quite honestly, I was getting sick of Windows. And the whole reason why I wanted to install Ubuntu onto my MacBook Pro was because Windows kept shitting the bed. And quite honestly, I was getting pretty sick and tired of it. So I figured, my MacBook has an Intel processor. It also has an AMD graphics card. The only thing I really need to worry about are like the drivers for the keyboard and trackpad, and other than that, Ubuntu should run natively on my MacBook Pro given it has those hardware specs. And so I went into several different GitHub forums and all sorts of other places to figure out how I could get Ubuntu onto my MacBook Pro. And eventually, I got myself a bootable installer, plugged it into my computer after installing a certain program that allows you to boot into Linux without using the native bootloader directly on the macOS BIOS. And so I plug in the USB flash drive, boot up Linux, and everything is good so far. But I don't have any mouse input because the native trackpad does not work because Linux does not have any native drivers for that just yet. I would have to do that post-installing Linux. So I just grabbed my trusty mouse, plugged in the Bluetooth receiver, and I just got started. And so what happened next is actually kind of crazy if you think about it, or I think it's kind of crazy. But basically, I was blowing through the setup assistant, going through all the steps, and I got to the point where I was going to choose where to install Linux. And well, I had specifically formatted my hard drive with a specific partition to hold Linux so that it wouldn't touch my macOS stuff. And I figured this wouldn't be an issue since Linux does not know what APFS is, and nothing bad would happen. I click install Ubuntu on a particular drive, and I go through that, and some pop-up pops up that says, "Do you want to continue?" I say yes, but here's the kicker. That message basically says, you're going to wipe everything on the selected drive, and this was before I could select the drive that I wanted to install it on. So what happened next was that I get into the next section of the installer, and I go to select the partition, and nothing's there. And I'm like, okay, this is kind of weird. What happened? And then I look around, and I figure out my SSD is blank. At this point, I'm shitting myself because I realized I just probably nuked my SSD. So I quickly shut down my machine, I plugged in my trusty macOS installer, and I boot into macOS Catalina installer after unlocking my computer because it has a T2 chip. But basically, I go inside Disk Utility, and no volumes are available. At that point, I realize I just lost everything on my SSD, including the operating system, my video files, my images, my music. Everything's gone. And that was all because I didn't read the instructions. And here's the thing that really made me just have a mental breakdown at that moment. I realized that I had just lost a massive video project that I was working on for one of my classes, and I had not backed up that project. And then I realized, oh fuck, I just lost all this work I did over Thanksgiving break. And at this point, I'm in tears. I'm breaking down because I realized I just fucked up, and there's probably no way for me to undo what I just did, given I have an SSD, and SSDs are a lot harder to recover data from compared to a physical hard drive. And well, I then just went to IT, see what they could do, and they couldn't really do anything about it. So I figured, it's fine, I can recreate what I made for this project for class some other time, and which I did that all today. But basically, I got this done today, and I've also reinstalled macOS. I've downgraded the macOS version on my computer because I don't have a Big Sur installer or a Monterey installer. By the way, don't upgrade to macOS Monterey. You cannot connect a Wii Remote to macOS Monterey. But that's besides the fact. What the takeaway from this is that I nuked my SSD because I didn't follow the instructions while I was installing Ubuntu. And quite honestly, if I were to go about this again, I would not do the same thing that I did. I should have used a test dummy computer. I have a 13-inch MacBook Pro that I specifically use for software experiments because, quite honestly, my 13-inch used to be my daily driver, but since I've gotten my 16-inch, that's kind of become a backup / trashy machine that I kind of just I always muck around with that thing because I really have no use case for it. And what I should have done was I should have tried to install Linux on that machine, not my daily driver. And also, I should have just been more careful while installing Linux because, quite honestly, in the flash of an instant, it just nuked my SSD. And there was no going back from that. And I really should have just been more careful. And I also should have just backed up my data. And well, just to wrap this up, what am I trying to say here is don't be stupid like me. Read the instructions and, quite honestly, know what you're doing. I will fully admit that I went into this with not the best idea of what exactly I was doing. I know how to install Linux. I just didn't know how to do it on a MacBook Pro. And quite honestly, that might just be me, and it might just be that this was the first time I ever tried to install Linux on a MacBook Pro, but that's besides the point. I done goofed, and quite honestly, I paid the price for it. My data got nuked, and quite honestly, I lost everything, and I kind of deserved it if you think about it. Well, I would not argue that. But basically, the takeaway from this video is don't be stupid like me. Always know what you're doing, and always, always, always back up your data at all costs. Especially if you're doing things that you're not quite sure about doing, or you don't quite have a full 100% of understanding of what you're doing. It's especially important to make a backup of your computer when you're doing this. And, well, that's it for me. If you liked what you saw, please like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all in the next video. Bye-bye.